Be me, Duke, pushing 30, writing code for a living. Not some Silicon Valley prodigy, and definitely not a hoodie-wearing shut-in. I'm just solid. I show up on time, fix what needs fixing, don't break production, get paid, and disappear back into my low-noise routine. My job was pretty good for a long time. I worked for a mid-sized tech company, the kind that makes some obscure but essential software for other, bigger companies. The pay was decent, the work was challenging enough to be interesting, and the culture was exactly what you'd expect from a department that was about 90% male engineers. It wasn't a frat house, nothing like that. It was just functional, a meritocracy. Nobody cared about your politics, your background, or what you did on the weekend. The only thing that mattered was the quality of your code and your ability to solve problems. You could be the weirdest dude on earth, but if your code was clean and efficient, you had everyone's respect. Our team was a well-oiled machine. We had our inside jokes, our arguments about the best programming languages, our late-night sessions fueled by cold pizza and energy drinks when a big deadline was looming. It felt like a team, a brotherhood in a way. We had each other's backs. The unspoken leader of this whole operation was a guy named Sonny. Sonny was probably in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. He'd been with the company since the beginning. He was the lead systems architect. The guy you went to when you hit a wall so hard, you thought the whole project was going to collapse. He was quiet, didn't say much in meetings. He'd just sit there, listening, and when everyone else had finished talking in circles, he'd point out the one simple thing everyone had missed. He never made you feel stupid for asking a question. He'd come over to your desk, look at your screen for a minute in silence, and then calmly walk you through the logic until you saw the solution yourself. He commanded a level of respect I've never seen anywhere else, not through authority or fear, but through pure, undeniable competence. He was the foundation of our entire department. Things were stable. We were productive. We were, for the most part, left alone to do our jobs. Then the company hired a new head of human resources. Her name was Carolina. The announcement came in a company-wide email from the CEO. It was full of the usual corporate jargon about new energy and forward-thinking leadership. We didn't think much of it. HR was just the department you dealt with for payroll and benefits. They were background noise. Carolina's introductory email landed a day later. It was different. It wasn't the typical, "Hi, I'm so excited to be here" message. It was a manifesto. It was filled with phrases like interrogating our existing paradigms, deconstructing workplace hierarchies, and ensuring the company became a truly equitable and safe space. I remember reading it and just feeling a little confused. We already felt safe. We felt respected. We were building software, not a political movement. A few of the guys were joking about it on the team chat. Memes were shared. The consensus was that it was just some new age corporate nonsense that she had to get out of her system. We figured she'd get bored and leave us alone eventually. We were wrong. The changes started small. First, it was the posters. The break room walls, which used to be bare except for a calendar and a fire escape plan, were suddenly plastered with motivational posters. But they weren't about teamwork or success. They were about unconscious bias and checking your privilege. It was weird, but easy enough to ignore. You just get your coffee and don't look at the walls. Then came the new, anonymous feedback portal. Carolina sent out a long email explaining that this was a tool for employees to report microaggressions and any behavior that made them feel uncomfortable in the workplace. She assured everyone that all reports would be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly by HR. A quiet chill went through the department. The easygoing banter, the jokes we used to tell to blow off steam, started to die down. Suddenly, you had to think twice before you said anything, wondering if it could be misinterpreted by someone and sent to the anonymous portal. The feeling of camaraderie started to erode, replaced by a low level of suspicion. But the real bomb dropped about a month after she started. A mandatory all-hands meeting was called. No one knew what it was about. Carolina stood at the front of the conference room, beaming with an almost missionary zeal. She announced that she had secured approval from the CEO for a comprehensive month-long training program. It was called the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Transformation Initiative, and it was mandatory for everyone. A hand went up. It was one of the project managers. He asked if the technical teams could have a condensed version, since we were in the middle of a critical development cycle for a major client. The deadline was less than 2 months away. Losing valuable work time was not an option. Carolina's smile tightened just a little. She explained that this training was not optional, nor could it be condensed. It was fundamental to the company's future. It would be 2 hours, every single day, for 4 weeks. The room was silent. You could feel the collective anxiety rising. 2 hours a day is a quarter of our core working hours, for a whole month. It was a productivity death sentence. We all looked at Sonny. He was just sitting in his usual spot at the back, face unreadable. He didn't say a word. So, the training began. The first week was focused on systemic privilege and power dynamics. We all filed into the big conference room. The atmosphere was like a funeral. Carolina stood at the front with a PowerPoint presentation. For 2 hours, she talked about how society was a fundamentally oppressive structure, designed by men to benefit men. She showed us charts and graphs. She used academic terms. Any accomplishments of our civilization were framed as products of an unjust system. The message was clear. As men, we were all born with an unearned advantage. We were, knowingly or not, part of the problem. Our quiet, productive office was, in fact, a bastion of that oppressive structure. It was bizarre. We were just a bunch of guys who liked computers. We weren't oppressing anyone. We were just trying to write good code and pay our bills. One of the younger developers tried to ask a question. He mentioned that he grew up in a poor rural area, worked 2 jobs to get through college, and never felt like he had any special privilege. Carolina gave him a patient, condescending smile. She told him that his experience was valid, but he was confusing economic hardship with systemic privilege. She explained that his maleness still afforded him advantages he couldn't even see. The developer just sat back down, confused and embarrassed. After that, nobody asked any more questions. We learned to just sit there and absorb it. The 2 hours would crawl by. We'd stare at the screen, nod when she looked in our direction, and count the minutes until we could get back to our desks and do some actual work. But the damage was already being done. When we did get back to our desks, the mood was sour. The easy collaboration we once had was gone. The atmosphere was thick with resentment. You couldn't escape it. The concepts and language from the training started seeping into everything. A female colleague from the marketing department, who was in the training with us, now analyzed every interaction through this new lens. If you disagreed with her idea in a meeting, it wasn't a professional difference of opinion anymore. It was mansplaining. If a bug was found in a piece of code written by a male developer, it was met with a sarcastic comment about male arrogance, leading to sloppy work. Carolina encouraged this. She called it speaking truth to power. Week 2 was even worse. The theme was toxic masculinity in the workplace. Now, we weren't just passively privileged, we were actively toxic. Carolina described things like being stoic, focusing on problem solving instead of feelings, and even working long hours as symptoms of this toxicity. Basically, the very traits that made our department successful and efficient were now being framed as a psychological disorder. The fun part of this week was the role-playing exercises. She would pair us up and give us scenarios. Duke, you are a manager. Your female subordinate starts crying because she's stressed. Demonstrate a non-toxic response. It was a minefield. There was no right answer. If you offered practical solutions, you were being dismissive of her feelings. If you offered sympathy, you were being patronizing. The correct answer, according to Carolina, was a complex series of validating statements and inquiries about her emotional state that felt completely unnatural and unhelpful. Most of us just gave one-word answers and waited for the humiliation to be over. This was when we started to notice Carolina's frustration with us. She wanted us to engage, to confess our toxic sins, to have emotional breakthroughs in the middle of a conference room. But we were engineers, we were logical, we were private, we just shut down. Our silence, our refusal to perform for her, was infuriating. Her professional demeanor started to crack. The condescending smile was replaced by a sharp, impatient tone. She started calling people out directly. Duke, why aren't you contributing? Does this topic make you uncomfortable? It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. The deadline for our big project was getting closer and closer. The 2 hours we lost every day, plus the complete collapse of morale, was taking its toll. We were falling dangerously behind schedule. The project manager was in a constant state of panic, trying to explain the delays to the higher-ups without throwing HR under the bus. He knew that complaining about Carolina's mandatory training would be a career-ending move. It would be twisted into him being against diversity. So, we all suffered in silence. The pressure was immense. We started working later, trying to make up for the lost time. I remember one night, Sonny, me, and a few other guys were there past 10 p.m., trying to fix a critical database issue. We were exhausted. Someone made a joke, something like, "I guess this is our toxic masculinity in action, working hard to meet a deadline." Nobody laughed. It was too real. The third week arrived. The theme was allyship and accountability. The focus now shifted from our own supposed toxicity to our duty to police the toxicity of others. We were taught that being a silent bystander was just as bad as being the aggressor. We were instructed to call out our male colleagues for any perceived microaggressions. Carolina literally gave us a list of offenses to watch out for. It included things like interrupting a woman, taking up too much space in a meeting, and using humor as a deflection mechanism. This was the final straw for the team's social fabric. Now, we weren't just suspicious of HR and other departments. We were being told to be suspicious of each other. The guy sitting next to you, the one who helped you debug your code last week, was now someone you were supposed to be monitoring for ideological infractions. The department became a ghost town of silent, isolated individuals. Everyone came in, put on their headphones, and spoke only when absolutely necessary for the job. The soul of the place was gone. All this time, Sonny had remained silent. He sat through every training session, his face a mask of calm neutrality. He never participated, but he never openly resisted either. He just observed. But we could see the toll it was taking. He was the heart of the team, and his team was being systematically dismantled and demoralized in front of him. The project was now on red alert. We were going to miss the deadline, and it was going to be a spectacular failure. The client was a huge source of revenue for the company. Missing this deadline would have catastrophic financial consequences. Everyone knew it. The stress was unbearable. And that brings us to the incident. It was the Wednesday of the third week of training. We had just discovered a major architectural flaw in the system, a ticking time bomb that needed to be addressed immediately. It would require all hands on deck, a focused, uninterrupted effort from the entire senior development team. We were discussing it in a hushed panic at our desks when the calendar notification popped up on our screens. Mandatory training, allyship workshop. It was time for our daily 2-hour session of corporate re-education. We all looked at each other. There was no way. We couldn't go. The project would literally burn down if we left our desks for 2 hours. We all turned once again to look at Sonny. He looked at the server logs, then at the clock, then at the faces of his team. He took a deep breath, stood up from his desk, and started walking towards the conference room. We thought he was just going to the training, but he walked right past the door where Carolina was waiting and headed for the project manager's office. A few minutes later, he and the PM walked back out and headed for the conference room together. They stepped inside. The rest of us stayed at our desks, pretending to work, but really just listening, waiting. The door was slightly ajar. We heard Sonny's voice. It was calm, respectful, and firm. The voice he always used when explaining a complex technical problem. He wasn't complaining about the training itself. He was simply stating a fact. He explained the severity of the technical crisis we were facing. He laid out the steps required to fix it, and the man-hours it would take. He respectfully requested that, for today only, the engineering team be excused from the session so that we could prevent a multi-million-dollar disaster. He wasn't challenging her authority. He was treating her like a reasonable colleague, presenting a problem and a logical solution. There was a pause. Then we heard Carolina's voice. And it was not reasonable. It was dripping with venomous condescension. She told Sonny that she was profoundly disappointed. She said that his attempt to prioritize a technical issue over the human-centric work of the training was, in her words, the very essence of the problem she was trying to fix. It got worse. She accused him, in front of the project manager and the few other people already in the room, of trying to sabotage her initiative. She said that his resistance was a perfect example of how dominant groups protect their privilege, and that his old way of thinking was precisely what was holding the company back. It was a complete and total public humiliation. She wasn't just rejecting his request, she was taking his professional concern, his dedication to the company, and twisting it into a personal character flaw. She was using the language of her ideology to publicly shame the most respected man in the entire company. The project manager tried to interject, to support Sonny, but she cut him off. We heard one final thing from Carolina. Her voice was loud and clear. "The training is not optional, Sonny. Get your team in here, now." There was a long, dead silence. Then, the conference room door opened wider. Sonny walked out. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He didn't look anything at all. His face was completely blank. He walked past all of us, went straight to his desk, and didn't say a single word. He sat down, looked at his monitors for a moment, and then slowly, deliberately, he locked his workstation. He picked up the small plant he kept on his desk and his coffee mug. Then he stood up, and without looking at anyone, he walked towards the exit. He didn't come back. The rest of us just sat there, frozen at our desks. Nobody said anything. The silence was deafening, heavier than any argument could ever be. We just stared at Sonny's empty chair. The coffee mug and the little plant were gone. It looked like he had never even been there. A ghost. A few minutes passed. The project manager shuffled out of the conference room, looking pale. He didn't look at any of us. He just went to his office and closed the door. Then, Carolina appeared at the conference room doorway. She looked annoyed, flustered. She scanned the room, saw our faces, and then noticed Sonny's empty desk. Her expression tightened. She clapped her hands together sharply, a brittle, artificial sound. She announced that the training session was starting and that we were all expected inside. Nobody moved, not a single person. We didn't look at her, we didn't look at each other. We just stared at our screens, at the wall, at anything but her. Our collective silence was our only weapon. It was a solid wall of passive resistance. Her voice became strained. She repeated that the training was mandatory, and that our lack of participation would be noted in our performance reviews. It was an empty threat, and we all knew it. Performance reviews didn't matter if the company went under because its flagship product failed. After another long, agonizing minute of silence, she spun on her heel and went back into the conference room, leaving the door open. We could hear her starting the presentation, her voice echoing in the nearly empty room. She was talking to the marketing people and the two junior engineers who didn't have the courage to stay at their desks. The whole thing felt like a farce. The rest of that day was a blur of silent, frantic work. An unspoken agreement passed through the team. We were going to try to save the project. Not for the company, not for the CEO, and certainly not for Carolina. We were doing it for Sonny. We were going to prove that he was right, that the work mattered. We worked with a grim, focused intensity I'd never seen before. We stayed late into the night, ordering food to the office, a silent wake for the team we used to be. We talked a little then, in hushed tones. Not about Carolina, we talked about Sonny, about the things he'd taught us, about how he'd saved this project or that one from the brink of disaster over the years. We were eulogizing a living man. The next morning, the email was in our inboxes. It was from Sonny, sent to the entire technical division and CC'd to the CEO and HR. The subject line was simple: resignation. The body of the email was even simpler. It was 2 sentences. Please accept this as formal notification of my resignation from my position as lead systems architect, effective immediately. I wish the company all the best in its future endeavors. That was it. No explanation, no emotion, no accusations, just a clean professional severing of a 30-year career. It was more damning than any angry tirade could ever have been. It was the cold, hard logic of a man who had calculated the variables and reached an inescapable conclusion. This place was no longer worth his time. The email landed like a stun grenade. A silent shockwave rolled through the office. The first domino had fallen. An hour later, a second email went out. It was from the 2 other senior architects, Sonny's closest colleagues, men in their 50s who had worked with him for over a decade. Their resignations were formatted almost identically to his. Short, professional, effective, immediately. And then the floodgates opened. It started with the senior developers, the team leads, guys who had been mentored by Sonny, One by one, their resignation emails hit the server. There was no big meeting, no dramatic speeches. It was a quiet digital rebellion. I remember sitting there, watching the emails come in, feeling a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. This was real. This was happening. I looked around the room. I saw my colleagues, men I respected, men I had worked with for years. I saw the looks on their faces. They weren't angry anymore. They were resolved. The question wasn't if we were leaving. It was when. Staying felt like a betrayal of Sonny, of our team, of the very principles of competence and respect that had made this a good place to work. What were we staying for? To be lectured daily about our inherent flaws by someone who didn't understand our work and had just publicly crucified our mentor. To work twice as hard to salvage a project for a management that clearly didn't value us or our contribution. Number 1. I opened a new email. I typed in Carolina's address and the CEO's. I wrote my 2 sentences, and I hit send. The feeling that washed over me was not regret. It was relief. By noon, out of a department of 15 engineers, 10 of us had resigned. The only ones left were the 2 scared juniors and 3 mid-level guys who probably had mortgages and families and couldn't afford to take the risk. I didn't blame them. The office was a graveyard. Desks were being cleaned out. Personal effects were being put into cardboard boxes. We moved with a quiet dignity. We were professionals to the very end. We exchanged quiet handshakes and nods. See you on the other side. Keep in touch. A bond of solidarity formed in that moment, stronger than anything Carolina's team-building exercises could ever have hoped to achieve. We were a team again, united in our departure. Carolina didn't show her face all day. She was locked in the CEO's office. We could see them through the glass walls, talking animatedly. Or rather, he was talking, gesturing, pacing. She was sitting very, very still. The initial reaction from upper management was, apparently, denial. A friend in another department later told me what the initial spin from Carolina had been. She told the CEO that this was a good thing, a necessary purging of the department's toxic elements. She claimed that the departing employees were the ones who were resistant to change, and that this cultural reset would allow her to rebuild the team from the ground up with more diverse and forward-thinking talent. And the CEO, who understood spreadsheets but not people, and especially not the intricate ecosystem of a high-functioning engineering team, had apparently bought it, for a few hours anyway. The denial phase ended abruptly that afternoon. It ended when the big client called. The project manager, one of the few people who hadn't resigned yet, had to deliver the news. He had to tell our biggest customer that the project was not only delayed, but that the entire core team responsible for building and maintaining their system had just walked out the door. The client, predictably, went ballistic. Suddenly, this wasn't an abstract HR issue about culture. It was a 5-alarm fire on the balance sheet. This was the moment the CEO finally understood. He didn't understand the humiliation. He didn't understand the destroyed morale or the broken trust. But he understood the language of lost revenue and broken contracts. We saw the change in his demeanor through the glass wall of his office. The pacing stopped. He stood over Carolina, his hands on the table, leaning in. The look on his face was one of cold, surgical fury. The illusion she had carefully constructed had just shattered against the hard wall of reality. Her HR buzzwords were useless now. Interrogating paradigms doesn't fix a crash server. Deconstructing hierarchies doesn't deliver a product to a furious client. She had mistaken our department for a sociology classroom. She thought she could experiment on us with her pet theories, and had failed to realize that we were the engine of the entire company, and she had just thrown the engine into a blast furnace. The CEO's desperate counteroffensive began later that evening. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered. It was him, the CEO. His tone was completely different now. No more corporate cheerleading. He sounded stressed, desperate. He asked me what it would take for me to come back. He offered me a raise, a big one, 20%. I listened patiently. When he was done, I gave him my answer. I told him, respectfully, that it wasn't about the money. I said I was no longer confident in the company's leadership and its direction. I thanked him for the offer and wished him luck. Then I hung up. I found out later he had called every single one of us who had resigned. He made the biggest offers to Sonny and the other senior architects. Double their salary, he told them, a promotion, anything. They all gave him the same answer: no. It was never about the money, it was about respect. And respect, once destroyed, cannot be bought back with a bigger paycheck. The company was in a death spiral. They put out emergency job listings. Senior systems architect, lead developer. They offered signing bonuses that were absurdly high. But the tech community is small. Word gets around. The story of the mass walkout spread like wildfire on professional networks and private forums. Nobody wanted to touch our former company with a 10-foot pole. It was seen as a toxic workplace, not because of the engineers, but because of the management that had driven them out. Their Glassdoor rating, which had been a solid 4.5 stars, plummeted into the red. Review after review appeared, telling a consistent story of a great engineering culture destroyed by an out-of-touch HR department. Carolina's name was never mentioned, but her shadow loomed over every single negative review. I saw her one last time, about a week after I left. I had to go back to the office to drop off my company laptop and sign some final paperwork. As I was leaving, I saw her. She was walking out of the building, carrying one of those standard cardboard boxes filled with personal items. A frame picture, a couple of books, a sad-looking desk plant. She wasn't escorted by security, but she was walking quickly, her head down, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Her face wasn't angry or defiant anymore. It was pale and tear-streaked. She had won her ideological victory. The office was now, presumably, safe from our toxic masculinity. It was also empty and failing. I didn't feel happy watching her. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt a profound sense of waste. All of that talent, all of that productivity, all of that potential, gone, sacrificed on the altar of an ideology that had no connection to the real world. The final chapter of the story wrote itself over the next 6 months. The company failed to deliver the project. They lost the big client. This triggered a financial crisis. They had massive layoffs, starting with the marketing department. Their reputation was shot. They couldn't attract new talent to replace us, and they couldn't secure new contracts. About 8 months after we walked out, the news broke that the company was being acquired by a larger competitor. It wasn't a merger, it was a fire sale. They were bought for pennies on the dollar, just for their intellectual property. The brand was dissolved. Everyone who was left lost their jobs. And what about us? The week after we all quit, Sonny called a meeting. He invited all 10 of us who had walked out to a local diner. He laid out a business plan he had written on a stack of napkins. He proposed that we start our own company, a specialized software consultancy firm. He said that we had the talent, the experience, and the teamwork. We had everything we needed. We didn't even have to vote. Everyone was in. We pooled our savings. We worked out of Sonny's garage for the first 2 months. It was hard. It was stressful. But it felt right. We were back to being a team. The meritocracy was back. No buzzwords, no ideology. Just hard work and good code. Our first major client, the biggest competitor of our old company. They had heard about our walkout and were looking to build a new system to leapfrog the competition. They knew exactly who to call. We landed the contract. It was bigger than any single project we had ever worked on. And we delivered. Ahead of schedule and under budget. Today our little company is thriving. We've moved out of the garage and into a proper office. We've hired a few more people. We have only one rule in our company handbook, written by Sonny himself. It just says, do good work, respect the people who do it. That's it. That's the whole culture. Sometimes I think back on the whole saga. Carolina probably thinks she was the hero of the story, the brave change agent who was thwarted by a bunch of stubborn, knuckle-dragging men. But she missed the point entirely. This was never a battle of men versus women. It was never about resisting progress. It was about a simple, fundamental truth. In the real world, competence matters. Results matter. Respect is earned, not demanded. You can't build a functioning company on a foundation of guilt and resentment. You build it on the quiet, steady competence of people like Sonny. And if you disrespect that foundation, if you try to tear it down for the sake of your own ideology, you'll find out very quickly that the entire house will come crashing down on top of you.